Hey everyone, in this video I'll be going over the Sillybutts breacher. This is a pump action shell-fed blaster that feeds from a tube magazine. The breacher is a blaster that gives a true shotgun experience, from being able to fire multiple ammo types down to the loading process. The hardware kit was paid for at full price from Capital 3D and I'm not obligated to make this video. With the disclaimer out of the way, let's go over this blaster from tip to butt. Starting at the front, there's a giant orange muzzle. This is the threaded version which allows me to quickly swap out the magazine tube caps, which changes the capacity of the blaster. There are 4 options of end caps, a flush cap, a textured cap that makes it easier to swap out, and 2 extension caps that increase the magazine capacity by 1 or 2. I prefer the 1+ extension cap as it is a decent balance between blaster length and magazine capacity. Behind the muzzle is the priming grip. I'm using the standard slim grip, but I found it pretty hard to get a good grip on, especially without gloves, so I added a few strips of grip tape to it, which helps a lot. After breaking the blaster in, it has become a lot easier to prime, so I might remove the tape as it picks up dirt and makes the blaster look a bit tacky. On the top, I have a modified top rail where I've removed the front sections of Picatinny to give a more slim profile, as well as added a front sight post. This front sight is more for reference when aiming rather than being a precision sight, since this is a shotgun, so it's not supposed to be a precision blaster. Where the Picatinny actually starts, I have a match saver attached. This holds an extra shell that can be quickly breech loaded. It's half tactical, half practical, but it can be pretty useful if you play game modes that require specific ammo types. Behind that, I have my custom side saddle for silly shells. I didn't like the existing breacher side saddle designs since they either looked super bulky or are positioned further back on the blaster. To cap off the top rail, I have the printed seagull rear iron sights. The inner posts have also been raised to line up better with the front sight post. These are too low to really use comfortably on the breacher, but it's a Nerf shotgun, so you're not going to be accurate no matter what you do. I've also swapped out the pistol grip for a Lynx grip by Jake. I don't like the grip design Sillybutts uses, and the Lynx grip looks and feels way better. Continuing my anime girl themed blaster trend, this blaster is themed around Hoshino and her Eye of Horus shotgun from Blue Archive. I had to make the creative decision to change the black sections to pink to avoid getting crucified by the Sydney Nerf admins. While Hoshino uses a semi-auto shotgun and this is a pump action shotgun, if I was to do this blaster again, I'd probably theme it around Nico's M870 instead. Hoshino was just a safer choice because of the white and pink color scheme over Nico's darker color palette. For the assembly experience, the breacher is definitely a more involved build. There's a lot of moving parts in this blaster, especially around the lifter mechanism, so it's best to take your time with this build. You'll likely need to assemble and reassemble parts of this blaster multiple times and tinker with them in order to get them working correctly. It'll also make your life easier to make sure your printer is properly tuned to eliminate some variables that prevent the blaster from working properly. Also note there are different versions of parts you'll need to print depending on the types of hardware you have. This is definitely not a first build project to tackle, and Sillybutts gives multiple warnings that the assembly process will not be an easy affair. Excluding print time, it took me about a weekend to assemble the blaster into a working state, with a few extra hours of tinkering to get it to perform more reliably. It also took a few hours of shooting to break in some parts, which has helped its reliability as well. I will note that my build experience would have been more streamlined than most. The hardware kits by Capital 3D are self-sourced by them and replace the Imperial hardware with metric equivalents. The official hardware kits use a mix of Imperial and metric hardware, which look very similar, especially the heat inserts, which is something you'll need to keep in mind while assembling. You'll also need to make sure you are printing the correct magazine parts depending on the drum springs included in your kit. There are different files for using foam blast drum springs or generic drum springs, so make sure you know which you have before printing. Since this isn't just a normal pump action springer, I'll go over the operation of the blaster. To insert silly shells into the tube magazine, push them up through the lifter. The shell will be properly loaded once it clears the claw part on the left side of the blaster. With the standard magazine caps, the tube fits 5 shells, with the extension caps increasing the capacity by 1 or 2 shells. To load a shell, pull the pump grip back until the shell comes out from the tube and lands on the lifter. push the pump grip forward to load the shell, and now the blaster is ready to fire. You can top up the magazine tube with another shell for the maximum capacity, or just start blasting. I recommend doing this motion quickly and with a little bit of force, as the lifter mechanism can fail if the parts don't sync up properly. My method of loading the breacher from empty is priming the blaster to open the breech, placing a shell directly onto the lifter and loading that, then loading the tube magazine to capacity. This saves a few motions of needing to grab an extra shell after priming the blaster. You can also dual load or possibly quad load if your hands are big enough, but since I don't have an optimized rig for silly shells yet, this is kind of hard for me to set up during games for quick reloads. Another neat trick you can do is use your thumb to block the magazine tube from releasing a shell while priming the blaster, which lets you drop a specific shell you want to use into the breech immediately instead of needing to cycle through the magazine or loading the shell you want into the tube and then cycling the blaster. This is a pretty situational move, but can be pretty cool or helpful if you ever need to load a specific ammo type during the game. I found it pretty common for the blaster to fail to properly release a shell from the tube if the blaster is primed slowly or if the shells are slightly off spec. This can be remedied quickly by pressing on the back of the claw pieces on either side depending on what stage the shell gets stopped by. In my case, it's usually the left one. Another issue I sometimes run into is the magazine releasing more than one shell, which is a bit more annoying to fix. Moving on to performance, this segment is going to be slightly different to how I normally do it due to the sheer number of ammo types and shells the blaster can use. I'll have the FPS values on screen now for you to pause and have a look at, and then I'll talk about the shells while some of the firing demo footage plays in the background. If you guys want it, I can make a separate video on the test firing footage of all the shells I've tried in the future. It is worth noting that I don't have the stock spring in my breacher. It's supposed to have a 15cm spring, but my spring is about 20cm long. Capital 3D sent out 30cm springs on accident, so I cut mine down with a little extra length to hopefully have some more performance. Also note these are mostly single dart FPS values, as the multi-shot shells are too difficult to crony. I also don't have some of the niche ammo types such as Ultra, Hyper, N1, Boomco, or 50 cal foam balls, so they won't be included in the FPS values or the firing demos. Starting off with the Elite Dart shells, these will fit a single full-length dart in each slot, or 2 half-length darts to double the darts in the spread. The breacher is compatible with the 1, 2, 3, and 4 time shells, as well as the additional remixes that change the spacing of the darts in the shell. The 1-time shells are decent but have a slight design quirk. There's a little nub in the middle of the shell, which I think is there to add friction when using a full-length dart, or to be a little separator when using 2 half-length darts. This means the shell won't be able to act as a barrel, since this nub will be adding extra friction only on the sides, affecting performance. There are also single half-dart shells which are rifled, with 2 rifling options in the official shells download, and some other rifle options remixed online. I've been using the Trivictus rifled shells, which are pretty neat to use as slug rounds if you need more range and are more efficient than the standard 1-time shells. The 2-time shells were uninteresting to me, so I didn't bring any of them to test. I quite like the 3-time shells as they give a decent balance on range and spread, while also not being too much of a hassle to load compared to the 4-time shells. I've printed a lot of 3x shells to be my main shells, but I've printed a few of the remixed 3x shells that separate the slots for darts more than the official ones to test. These tend to have a tighter spread and are easier to load, so I might move over to these shells as my main ones if I ever need to reprint shells. The 4x shells are fun since they launch a massive cloud of darts, but they have even less range than the 3x shells. Both 3x shells and the 4x shells barely even reach 10 meters, so they're pretty limited to close range only. The rival shells take 3 rival rounds, but you can also load just a single round and push it down to the bottom if you want to squeeze out a little more performance. These shells aren't bad, but they don't have much extra range compared to elite shells and have less spread, so they're more fun to use seeing the rounds bounce everywhere rather than actually being a performance choice. The mega shells will either need to be breech loaded to fit the full length dart, or the dart will need to be cut down slightly to fit flush into the shell and loaded into the magazine tube. I unfortunately haven't been able to test these at a level I'd like, since my official mega darts are all been worn out, and the knockoff darts I ordered either had off-spec dimensions, poor gluing, or slightly damaged in shipping. The ones I did get to test with cut down knockoff AccuFake megas worked pretty well and act as fun slug rounds. They go surprisingly far and just fall short of 20 meters. The last ammo type I was able to test was Mega XL. Apparently these darts have terrible QC and their dimensions vary from batch to batch, so there are remixed shells online that have larger or smaller inner diameters to provide better fits. My batch fits well with the official Mega XL shells, so that's what I've used for testing. Like the normal Mega darts, these will either need to be breech loaded or cut down to fit within the shell to be loaded into the magazine tube. Also like Megas, they're fun to shoot but not a very competitive option. They're probably more useful in games that need them to tag out special targets. I didn't get around to testing any cut down Mega XL darts, but the full length ones barely reach 10 meters, but sometimes we'll get outliers going up to 15. Now there's one extra shell I was able to test, which is the 6-inch Trivictus bottlenose shell that takes a single half-length dart. This needs to be breech loaded to work and packs quite a punch. A funny option to use if you need extra range or really hate someone. The only issue is the shell sometimes won't eject properly and you'll have to eject it manually. To do this, prime the blaster as far back as you can, push down on the back of the extractor, fully prime the blaster and remove the bottlenose shell. I find it easiest to do if you point the blaster downwards so the shell will fall down on its own and you can just focus on priming the blaster. The breacher definitely scratches that itch for a shell-fed tube magazine blaster that I and many others have had for years, but it's not without its flaws. Most of them aren't the blaster's fault, but they come from the silly shells it uses. They're massive, which not only makes them cumbersome to hold or to find gear to carry them, but also makes this thing ridiculously long if you just want to have 7 shots. I understand the shells have to be this tall to fit elites or stacked half-lengths, but them being this wide just to fit Mega XLs is a big drawback for only a small gimmick in my opinion. The shells also use up a considerable amount of filament and time to print, which might not seem like a big deal like printed magazines, but you need to print a large number of them just to use the blaster in a game, and they are more likely to get damaged compared to magazines. They're designed to avoid being worn out too quickly, but I've only fielded the blaster for a few games and plinking sessions, and a few of my shells have already broken around the extractor rim, making them unreliable for use. Moving on from issues I have with silly shells, the assembly of this blaster is also quite annoying. First of course is the trial and error needed to get the lifter mechanism working. You either need to sand down your print bit by bit until it gets to the right height for all the parts to move in the correct timing with the pump grip, or tighten and loosen some screws to do the same thing. I assume it's designed this way to account for tolerance differences in prints, but this can be a frustrating process to dial in due to the constant assembling and reassembling needed to the receiver section. My lifter still isn't fully dialed in and it still gets caught up every once in a while depending on the shell being fed or how the pump grip is handled. Another issue I have with how the blaster is assembled is the threaded rod used to connect the receiver and the multiple parts that stack up to make the back half of the blaster. The threaded rods don't have a head, and instead use a nut on either side to catch the rod from just sliding through the hole, if that makes sense. The issue I have with this is that they're just regular nuts which can come loose over time, and you can't really add Loctite to them. I'll probably end up swapping them out for lock nuts at some point to try and remedy this issue. Aside from those issues, the blaster is incredibly fun to use and gives an experience very few other blasters can match. While it's only really usable in CQB games with the limited range for most of the shell options, it makes up for it with the feeling you get from a shell-fed shotgun. Doing the reloads and seeing a cloud of darts fly and the shells eject just feels so cool, and most other blasters don't give me the same high. To answer the question on whether you should get a breacher, I would only recommend it if you really want a shell-fed magazine tube shotgun. It definitely won't please a performance chaser with its very limited range, and while it does have the ability to fire multiple ammo types, that's only really useful if your games give different ammo types special effects. I definitely wouldn't recommend this as a first blaster, since it doesn't even fit into a magazine ecosystem, and instead runs off a more niche shell system that requires a lot of shells to run the blaster in games. Even as a first DIY build, this is a massive challenge with all the assembly issues and quirks I mentioned before, and I'd recommend you try assembling a more traditional Springer before tackling this blaster. I'd only recommend the breacher to those dead set on having a shell-fed tube magazine shotgun style blaster. With options like the Firefly not having multiple ammo type compatibility, or the Spring Thunder becoming harder and harder to come by, the breacher is your best bet and pretty much only choice. It'll perform well in CQB fields with short sightlines, but can be quite cumbersome due to its size. I would also strongly recommend having a 3D printer of your own to print your own silly shells, as you'll likely need a lot and need to replace them in the future.
Hey, it's Editing Ben here, throwing in this editor's note to add on to my opinion on the breacher. So I had this video scripted and recorded after testing and fielding this blaster in a game, but before I went out to record all the firing footage for this video. It performed consistently well in my testing, but for some reason while I was recording the firing footage, my breacher decided it didn't want to feed the shells into the breacher properly 90% of the time, to the point where I couldn't fire an entire magazine without hiccups. I had to go back inside and tinker with the lifter multiple times, and it still wouldn't feed as consistently as I would like. It would feed perfectly fine off camera, but as soon as I hit record it would jam like crazy. After this experience, I cannot recommend this to beginners at all, since on top of the previous reasons I went over, there's just a chance the blaster decides to not work when you need it to. Even for the more experienced blaster builders, I would still keep this in mind when deciding on getting the breacher, as the thing can still work inconsistently despite you following the instructions to the letter. I might revisit this blaster in the future, but for now the breacher has gone from a very fun but gimmicky blaster to a frustrating but gimmicky blaster. Editor's note over, and back to the video.
Hardware kits and printed parts should be available at all the stores where you can get Sillybutts blasters, as well as Capital 3D and Sediment for those living here in Australia. I am not affiliated with any of these stores in any way, so do your own research before purchasing. Well, that's it for this video. Like, subscribe, and do the other YouTube stuff, and I'll see you next time.